Langston Hughes wrote a poem in the 1920s called Justice. It has only 4 lines. Hughes was fond of these short little poems. Justice. That justice is a blind goddess is a thing we blacks are wise. Her bandage hides 2 festering sores that once perhaps were her eyes. We're going to be discussing today, at the core of this lecture, the development of an American apartheid, an American segregation system that comes out of a deep history. That apartheid system was, of course, most famously the Jim Crow system of the American South and portions of the North and large portions of the West. But it was also a broader racial apartheid, as we perhaps know, but maybe don't know enough. As historians of the American West, like Elliott West and others, have shown, America's racial attitudes, its deepening theories of white supremacy, its practices, and above all, its deeply troubled, unreconciled memory of that war, the Civil War, of slavery, and of Reconstruction go with it. All peoples take their memories with them. Of course, it's true of immigrants. And we'll end today on the idea of immigration, which is all over this period. 26 million immigrants came into the United States between 1880 and 1920, and they were from all over the world, mostly Europe, but from Mexico, from Asia, God knows, especially the Chinese, but also the Japanese. Canadians came here, even in the late 19th century. The Caribbean, America's crazy quilt, pluralism. It comes from our beginnings, but it really comes from this era. This is a cartoon that appeared in the magazine called Puck, which was brilliant for cartoons. That's mostly why it existed. It's a Native American, of course, talking to a Chinese immigrant, and the Chinese immigrant is reading the long poster there and memorials about Chinese immigration, leading to exclusion acts. In the back, you have, of course, a black man taking a nap with his straw hat coming down, and a little, you can't see it probably, but next to him it says, "My day is coming." It's a cartoon full of all kinds of brutal ironies. You got the Chinese from the West in the lower image up there. Going east, you got white people with trains and covered wagons chasing, of course, an American Indian going west. I mean, cartoons simplify. But this problem of an American apartheid, separating races, which you ultimately cannot do, was everywhere. I mean, you can do it, but let me back up here. Whoops. That's a busy outline, but I'm going to go fast today. But, what is this history of all this race and racism and racialism, as some scholars will come to call it? What is history itself? Sometimes it beats you over the head, doesn't it? Smack between the eyes. We get hit by history when we don't expect it. Sometimes you can just feel history happening. People who were at the March on Washington in 1963, James Baldwin famously said, "We could feel our heritage." When have you been in a moment in your life when you could feel your heritage? Whatever that is. Family heritage, national heritage, ethnic heritage, heritage of your school. I don't know. Justice and injustice in any pluralistic society, in any society based on creeds, like this one, always have marched together. One has always caused the other, justice and injustice. Sometimes history is very subtle, though, isn't it? It's happening through forces we don't entirely know. It's happening in mystifying ways. They sometimes burst out, and sometimes they just keep moving, and pretty soon we wake up and it's a little different world. That's kind of the way racism worked. Racism could be horrible and blunt, as in a lynching, and I'll talk about that a bit in a minute. But the growth of this apartheid system wasn't overnight. Its real origins are in antebellum America, although scholars have fought like the Dickens over just when it began, with C. Vann Woodward leading the way, always arguing from his great book, The Strange Career of Jim Crow, way back in the 1950s. He used to work right over here. That really, the American Jim Crow system, and he had his focus primarily on politics, less on culture, really began in the 1890s because of the threat of populism, the threat of a whole new politics spreading across the South and the West and elsewhere, threatening to bring whites and blacks together in their economic interests, their material interests, as farmers, as the have-nots. And the powers, the corporate powers, the banking powers, the railroad powers and the planter powers got really worried about that. In other words, Woodward posited in The Strange Career of Jim Crow that Jim Crow is born out of the threat of a class struggle that was going to bring the races together more and more and more, and they bloody well better be separated, and hence there's a need for a new system. That's not the only origin of Jim Crow. And Woodward's thesis, although people spent careers trying to overthrow it, it still holds up a little. Racism and this apartheid system, like other apartheid systems, had absurdities to them and savage ironies, of course, and you know many of them. Perhaps you've experienced some of them. The black soldiers in World War II who had to guard German POWs across the American South out to the Southwest, where 200,000 to 300,000 German POWs were kept in prisoner of war camps. The black soldiers who had to guard them could not go into the restaurants and eat where the German POWs could eat. That wasn't exactly subtle, but those soldiers had to obey orders and keep things subtle. My dear departed colleague Nathan Huggins, who once had the stupidity to hire me at Harvard, told his story of being a 19-year-old enlisted man in 1945 guarding German POWs and having to stand outside the restaurants. And we were once in the lounge at the FM department at Harvard, and Nathan was saying, I'm teaching this new course on civil rights. I don't know where to begin it. Where the hell do you begin the civil rights? And we all sat around and had all our own ideas, and suddenly he told that story. And almost to a person, we said, Nathan, begin your course with that story. And apparently he did. I once took a high school group of 50 students off a bus into a restaurant in Hagerstown, Maryland. I won't give you the year. It was in the 70s. And I had picked this restaurant. I should have known. Maybe it was called something like the White Castle this or that. I don't know what it was called. But before I could even tell what was going on, the people running, and this was in the 1970s, people were running the restaurant had put my black students, about 8 of them out of the 50, maybe it was 10, back in a corner. And some of the white students came to me and said, did you see what just happened? I said, no, what happened? As usual, I was running around trying to make sure nobody was smoking or doing something dastardly. And suddenly, I didn't even have to organize it. My students said, we're not eating here. And en masse, we all walked out. And we went to McDonald's. I had to feed them. Oh, and the restaurant people were just, oh, we didn't really mean to do it. I mean, we weren't, yeah, you weren't. Goodbye. I want my deposit back. There are many origins to this American apartheid system. In the East, in the South, in the West, it's always somewhat political. We'll see this with the laws in a few minutes. It's always rooted in ideology, forms of white supremacy, some that seem rather soft compared to others, which become savage and even eliminationist. Fear of the mixing of blood. And there's always a variety. There's no single cause of Jim Crow. Like, there's often no single cause of anything. And that's why you don't always like historians, because you'd like to know what's the answer. Well, 3 or 4 things are the answer. There's always an economic root to Jim Crow. Competition. Whose jobs belong to white people, or what jobs belong to black people? What is black people's work? And what happens when black people's work becomes attracted to white people in depressions? Ideology, economics, politics, fierce racism. It's one of the most lethal mixtures of the production of our politics, our laws, our social structures in all of American history. I'll come back to that. Now, I'm going to run through a quick series of big issues of the Gilded Age, including the dispossession of Native Americans from the West in a moment. But I forgot to tell you about William Graham Sumner. Good Yale man, I guess, or whatever you want to call him. Some of you have heard of social Darwinism, perhaps. Maybe you've read about it. Richard Hofstadter wrote a great book on it. Mario Cuomo, the father, the older, gave one of the greatest convention speeches in the history of American political conventions at the 92 convention? Which one? Come on, Bev, you're the politicalist. I'm forgetting which. Anyway, he gave this. Look it up sometime. It was a speech about it was 88, excuse me, because it was a speech against Reaganism, of how he used the metaphor of Americans kind of throwing the less fit folk off of their wagons and off of their trains and out of their cars. And it was pure genius. As convention speeches go, it's a memorable one, you know. William Graham Sumner was born up here in Hartford. Actually, born in New Jersey, grows up in Hartford, came to Yale College, class of 1863, graduated during the war, did not enlist. Became an Episcopal priest in 1869. He was working in a church, the Church of the Redeemer in Morristown, New Jersey, when he decided, I don't want to be a priest anymore. He gave that up. He took an appointment at Yale College in social science. He's one of the first major sociologists in our history. He will teach at Yale from 1874 to 1909. Most of us don't last here that long. Proved to be a great place for his sister as well, Alice. She came here and met the football coach, Walter Camp, and all you old Yaleys knew who Walter Camp was, the founder of college football. So the Sumners were deeply entwined with Yale. It was Sumner, among many others, who fashioned this theory of applying Charles Darwin's theory of the origin of species and natural selection to society, to people. Some are more fit than others. Some are stronger. Some are taller. Sumner, in many, many metaphors, would say, the man who can knock down the most persimmons from the tree is more fit. Persimmons are it's not a great metaphor. I was going to bring a persimmon in today, but then I realized they just look like oranges, so it wouldn't matter. But this was this theory of fierce individualism that said we are all competing with each other, and there is not much of anything society or religion or your philosophy can do to make one person or one group better than another, and probably not much you can do to improve those who are behind. Think of the power of that set of ideas. Sumner once wrote, "We have now reached the point where individualism is possible." As though Americans have ever been needed telling that individualism is possible. How many things have you done today already that are purely individualistic? Hey, you're human. Sorry. Whenever we try to get paternalized, meaning controlled by the government, said Sumner, we only succeed in getting policed. He wanted laissez-faire government, famously. The government should not be involved in society, in people's lives, in social practices. He should keep his hands off the economy and people. It's a powerful set of ideas. Mark Twain will spend most of his writing career trying to demolish it. At the same time, Twain grew to love money and lose almost all of his. That's another story. But that social Darwinism, of course, didn't sit well with a lot of reforming Americans who are never going to stop trying to reform, including Emma Willard, who I've got a picture of here in just a moment, who is going to be where is she? There she is, one of the many leaders of the Women's Temperance Union, WCTU, Women's Christian Temperance Union, which that movement to try to get men off booze or people to stop drinking is a very old movement in America. It had more members than the abolition societies of the antebellum era. It's going to have a lot more members in the 80s and 90s to try to stop Americans from sinking into demon rum or demon whiskey. Reformers are never going to stop trying to regulate those railroads. The Gilded Age is a great era of reform in some ways. They don't succeed very often because they're up against powerful interest, to say the least. Here they are. This is a cartoon is that a Thomas Nast? No, that's a Puck, too. That's a Puck cartoon from 1883. It shows the great robber barons, Jay Gould, Cyrus Field, Russell Sage, and Cornelius Vanderbilt sitting on bags of their money. I don't know how well you can see it. And they're held up, of course, by every kind of laborer in America. Every kind of laborer in America is represented underneath there, and all the rest is the ocean. They're floating on a barge, held up by workers. And cartoons were something people read. I mean, you got to read all those little signs on these cartoons. Today, if you put more than one sentence in a cartoon, no one will probably pay attention. Americans had other big issues in the Gilded Age, not the least of which was this corporate power, the growth, tremendous growth, of corporate power in the railroads, in the mining industry, pretty soon in the steel industry, and pretty soon in the oil industry. But they had a problem in the simple fact that there were so many American veterans of that war, namely 400,000 Union veterans still alive, actually over 400,000 Union veterans still alive as of about 1890. By the early 1890s, pensions for Union veterans, who had become a powerful lobby, were 40% of the federal budget. Now, today we know the federal budget, huge percentages are what used to be called the defense budget. Now I guess it's the War Department budget. But the GAR, the Grand Army of the Republic, the Union Veterans Organization, had a lot of congressmen tied around their fingers because they voted. And they voted Republican. And in Washington, the next time you're there, or if you ever go to the National Portrait Gallery, it is in the old building, the old pension building. It's a beautiful structure. It's a gorgeous structure. It's now an art museum. Good use for it. But it was the whole thing, well, most of it was built to process pensioners. And those pensions spent or gave out approximately $8 billion over the life of the pension system. The last Union veterans are beginning to die off by the teens and 20s, and certainly by the 30s in the 20th century. They decline after 1890 markedly. The U.S. government spent approximately $2 billion to fight the American Civil War. It spent $8 billion on pensions for those soldiers. Now, that's the first American welfare system, done by the original Republican Party. Democrats hated this, except some of them, because their constituents had also been veterans. There were no pensions for former Confederate soldiers from the federal government. That is at least one thing that never got reconciled. Some, but though not all, of the ex-Confederate Southern states did provide some small pensions to Confederate veterans. But the sheer weight and power and significance of the presence of all of these old soldiers in that society created America's first welfare system and the single largest expenditure in the federal budget by 1890. There were many other problems. This cartoon shows the veterans, of course, gorging on coins. Then there's the problem of civil service reform, which is always a nice term for what to do about all that corruption, which began, corruption began in the book of Genesis, didn't it, I think? Or you don't have to wait for Deuteronomy for corruption. Among the great issues of the Gilded Age, though, was this idea of how do you clean up the spoils system? How do you clean up this system that says if you're loyal, you get a job in the government? Awarding government jobs without any examinations or qualifications became the commonplace practice of both parties. Between 1865 and 1891, federal government employees tripled from 53,000 to 166,000. Today it's well over 2 million, and most of them are not being paid, as you probably know, as we speak. I won't ask for any show of hands, anybody who comes from a family of federal employees. I'm not asking. There was some ugly corruption practiced in this spoils system, and politicians had to scramble like hell all the time to satisfy their constituents, satisfy job seekers. This is a cartoon of James Garfield, newly elected president, standing on some kind of table in a room full of people demanding jobs. I mean, he's going crazy. Everyone's waving something at him. I've done this, sir. I've done that. I've done this. I've done that. I voted for you. I did this back home. I did this. I did that. Half of them are probably from Ohio. Garfield, another Ohio president. There's a whole string of Ohio presidents through the rest of the 19th century. Maybe that's what went wrong. There's also an element to the system. It was a fee-based system in the government. If you worked in the Interior Department, you worked in Indian Affairs, you worked in, the Foreign office. I mean, the Secretary of State's office. You worked in whatever office you worked in. Perhaps trade policy. If you did anything for somebody, you negotiated a fee. How much you got? What's it worth? No, that's not going to get it done. And there's nothing to stop it. And hence, one effort after another for civil service reform to establish examinations, tests for the qualifications of people. Do they know what they're doing? We don't have this problem anymore, because we've had repeated civil service reform in America. James Garfield, as you may know, was assassinated by a distraught and angry job seeker who didn't get a job. He was assassinated by one of those guys. It led finally in 1882, in Garfield's administration, after he died, to the Pendleton Act, the Civil Service Reform Act. It gave a federal civil service commission jurisdiction and control over 10% of federal jobs. Only 10%. But it was a model, at least, to be used for the future. It was a big compromise between the parties, to say the least. Then there was, I don't think I have I guess I don't have a tariff. Do I have a tariff cartoon? No, I'm sorry. I don't have a tariff cartoon. We'll go back to these guys then. And tariffs, perhaps above all, ruled partisan politics in the Gilded Age. We think we have tariff problems today, or belief in tariffs today. Yikes. The Constitution's pretty clear. Congress is supposed to control tariffs. Set tariffs, authorize tariffs, negotiate tariffs. We don't do that anymore either. It was a tool, this tariff, this protection of internal manufacturing and products from foreign trade. It was a tool of special interest and the big corporate firms. It always has been. By the 1880s, there were tariffs on approximately 4,000 items of imports. This is in the 1880s. The Republican Party, by the 1880s, made tariffs their sort of signature issue. Now, it divided people within both parties, depending on where they were from in the American geography. The Democrats claimed that prices were artificially high because of these tariffs. They weren't wrong. And it hurt farmers. And that's going to begin to lead to the roots of that thing called the populist movement, the farmers' alliances, the farmers' revolts. Because in one economic panic after another, especially by 1893, which sets in the worst depression of all in the 19th century, farmers are getting killed. It led to constant partisan warfare and class warfare within politics. Democrats not only claimed that prices were artificially high, but the Republicans said, no, this is how we support growth within our economy. Growth. Everything about growth, though, had to do with monetary policy. And if anything, the only thing that might have taken precedence in national politics, which becomes sectional in America in those years, was whether the United States should be on a gold standard or a silver standard. Now, this may not seem like the sexiest issue, but it made and unmade politicians. It made and unmade the Democratic Party. It made and unmade William Jennings Bryan. It inflamed politics more than almost anything else. Farmers suffered a slow but awful decline in prices throughout the 80s and 90s. They wanted more cash in the economy. They wanted silver coins. They wanted millions of silver coins. Democrats, on the other hand, Republicans, on the other hand, big business, on the other hand, bankers, on the other hand, the whole Northeast wanted the gold standard. Less money in the possession of American citizens. Democrats wanted, by and large, silver coinage, while the silver mining industry was in decline. Republicans want higher tariffs, keep that gold standard, stable currency, stable economy, or so they hoped. What kind of money would America have? Money. This became highly sectional. The Northeast, by and large, Republican, gold standard. Silver mining, farmers in the South and the West, people who ran granaries, they want more money in circulation. They want more credit. They want silver. Congress kept trying to find little compromises between the gold standard and, we'll have some more silver coins. I don't know if any of you grew up. I'm old enough to remember my grandparents would once in a while for Christmas give me a silver dollar. It was so cool. I don't know what I did. I probably spent them on chewing gum. I don't know. No, probably on baseball cards, but a silver dollar, even for their generation, which was the Depression generation, or even earlier, they were teens and 20s people and immigrants. A silver dollar had politics behind it. Congress kept trying to do something about it. It passed this Silver Purchase Act and that Silver Purchase Act, trying to create more currency. And it has everything to do with the background of the 1896 election. Now, I thought I had a picture up here. But the 1896 election was almost an 1860 election. By the time the Populist Party started out as kind of a farmers' revolt, and then they called themselves the Farmers' Alliances out west, starting in Texas, but out west and in the South, morphed into what was known as the Greenback Labor Party. Then there was the Grange movement. There were Granges in every state in the Union. These were farmers' organizations. They were community organizations. They were like community councils. They were social organizations as well as economic lobbying organizations. That all morphed into a real political party that called themselves the Populist Party. If you're looking for one of the last times, there will be a couple more, one of the last times a third-party movement, had a real shot, or a lot of people thought they had a shot, was this moment, this crisis over class, over money, over immigration, over these teeming cities, where a whole lot of increasingly poor immigrant people are living and looking for some option, some kind of economic hope, along with still the majority of Americans on farms. They had some remarkable leaders. Tom Watson in Georgia, who's going to get sort of waylaid by race and racism. Ignatius Donnelly, who of Minnesota, who was an incredible orator, but he had all kinds of weird utopian ideas going too. But this Populist Party held a major convention in Omaha, Nebraska in 1892, and it was a real third party, and it's scaring the hell out of the two traditional parties. And it's scaring the hell out of Southerners who are afraid that black and white people here, black and white farmers, black and white workers, black and white railroad workers are going to get together politically. That's Woodward's argument about the origins of Jim Crow. And then the 1893 Depression hit. By 94 and 95, it's affecting everything and everybody. and there's a big election again, just like there was a big election in 1876 and a really big one in 1860. In the 1896 election, the two-party system almost broke, but not quite. The populists, many of them, would shoulder up to William Jennings Bryan, but not all of it. They didn't exactly buy into Bryan's silver crusade because they thought that it really was just more capitalism being organized in a different way. And whether they were right or wrong, historians, by the way, have at times really had divided interpretations of this thing called the populist movement and this whole core story of the upheaval of the 1890s. Because there's a lot of romanticism out there, not without some reason, for that populist movement. There's almost a yearning in America for some kind of populist movement that would, I don't know, break up the old system, And I think we've sort of been seeing that. But we don't always expect populism to come from the far right. But lo and behold, it's always had some hold on the far right. Free silver became the cause of the Democrats. There were some in the Democratic Party who still consider themselves gold Democrats, but they were mostly in the North and Northeast. The real political fixer of the 1890s for the Republican Party was a man named Mark Hanna from Ohio. And he was promoting one William McKinley to be the next president. And man, did it work. Now today, anything organized out of Ohio probably isn't going to go that far nationally. I don't know. Maybe. I don't know. But both parties, when they held their national conventions, had a portion of their membership walk out. The pro-silver few Republicans walked out of their convention in Chicago, and a few gold Democrats walked out of the Democrats' convention, and what does that do? It divides parties. It sets up a mess. William Jennings Bryan worked most of his, at that point, still fairly young life to become president. He will run for president in one way or another with one party or another, I think even one more time than Henry Clay did. Note, the people who've run the most never got elected. It took 5 ballots to nominate William Jennings Bryan, the boy orator, the prairie populist from Nebraska. Party was divided. There's a lot of talk about having a fusion ticket with the populists. Bryan said, no, we're all Democrats. His insistence was that all populists must come to the Democrats, and they weren't going to do it. The campaign was like a religious crusade, partly because Bryan was such a vociferous evangelical Christian. One journalist called the campaign a religious frenzy. And of course, one of the most famous lines in American presidential campaign history was what Bryan said in his speech at the Democratic Convention. Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer the wealthy classes' demand for a gold standard by saying to them, do you know it? Can you repeat it with me? You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold. Woo! I mean, people were jumping and screaming and cheering, and they'd march behind Bryan anywhere he wanted to go, but they marched to a colossal defeat. McKinley ran a campaign on moderation and prosperity. It shows McKinley standing on a kind of a globe announcing prosperity. Bryan ran all over the country, sometimes giving 20 speeches a day, wherever 3 or more would gather. McKinley won the popular vote by 600,000 votes, the Electoral College by 271 to 176. It was lopsided. The Democrats were really divided not only by this populist thing, but also there's the Socialist Party then, the Socialist movement then, and they didn't like the populists. Imagine that, Democrats who don't like each other. Now, out west, one of the biggest problems the United States faces is, of course, what's going to happen to the indigenous peoples? What's going to happen to the native peoples? What is the policy at any given time wreaked upon them by the federal government? All Native American peoples, and they're very diverse. Read our colleague Ned Blackhawk's book and his great synthesis of this. They all did one of 4 things, and most of them did all 4 for centuries. Crop growing. Some were nomadic and didn't grow crops. Livestock growing, almost all of them. Hunting, fishing, and gathering, all of them. And trading and raiding. There were people of the land and people of the flora and the fauna and the animal life near them. Namely, all across the Great Plains, there were people of the buffalo. Now, the Lakota Sioux remained largely nomadic. They're a prototype of that. The Pawnee, however, were village dwellers. They would sometimes move their villages, but they lived in villages. All of them hunted the buffalo. In 1820, there were an estimated 25 million buffalo across the American landscape of the Great Plains. 25 million. And it became eventually, especially as the buffalo were dying off, it became a thing for foreign visitors. A wonder of the American world was to see the buffalo. It's still kind of cool. You can see this all but extinct animal that had lived there for, 5,000 years. By the 1880s, there were approximately 300 left. That's one of the fastest extinctions, forced by humans, but also by some ecological changes. It's one of the fastest extinctions of an animal species, or near extinctions, ever. The buffalo depended on the grasslands of river basins, but so did the native peoples. The native peoples, in some ways, ended up living in the lands the buffalo needed as much as they did, under the pressure of the American settlers and the American army. Population pressures, racial contempt, war, of course, is going to not eliminate, but in some cases destroy some cultures of Native Americans. And it will lead to this Indian policy debate, endless debate in the late 19th into the 20th century about reservations and so-called civilization boarding schools. There were Supreme Court decisions, more than one, that defined Native peoples as wards of the state, wards of the country, and therefore in a separate category that could deny them citizenship and did deny them citizenship. They were never protected by the 14th and 15th Amendments until the 20th century. There was Native resistance, of course, famously, of the Apache in the Southwest, the Geronimo, the Nez Perce out in the Northwest with Chief Joseph trying to get to Canada, and many other groups. Often that resistance was as much cultural and economic as it was actually through warfare. There are all kinds of famous massacres, one after another after another. There were sustained military campaigns that were run by the strategy of nothing really short of extermination. It caused all kinds of reformers back east to get deeply concerned about this savagery being practiced against the so-called savages. It led to the creation of native boarding schools. It led to this movement to civilize and Christianize Native Americans. There were also reformers like Helen Hunt Jackson, an anthropologist, reformer of all kinds, who wrote a book called A Century of Dishonor in 1881 that got a lot of attention. There were Americans that wanted to somehow stop this. That spirit is still there, perhaps, and I don't know, one land acknowledgement after another we do, as though somehow that land can be restituted, given back. The reservation system grew out of this in the 1890s, as did the first Christian boarding schools. The first was at Carlisle, Pennsylvania in 1879. They have a terrible, interesting but terrible history. What was destroyed really was more Native American independence, as well as, in some cases, culture, and in some places, land. They were overwhelmed by a market economy. They were overwhelmed by settlers, although it does not serve us well to simply say what happened to Native Americans was only because of settler colonialism. There were many other factors. What came out of this eventually was an idea. It's an old idea, really, but it finally got some legal traction by the end of that century. And that was this notion of Indian sovereignty. That because they were original, because they were indigenous, because they had one treaty after another violated, sometimes treaties were signed and violated the next week or month. One treaty after another, after another, after another, finally led in the early 20th century to some legal action that leads to this profound and still potent idea of Indian sovereignty, that a Native American group, however they want to define themselves, and whoever gets in, have a special sovereignty because of the history of the United States. Now, let's go back to this problem. That's Booker T. Washington, by the way, who never completely gets his due, I guess, but let's say a word on him in a minute, maybe. What sets up the Jim Crow system, or not sets it up, marks it, scars it, and arguably the deepest scar on American history, an unreconcilable scar, was what happened with lynching in the 1880s and 1890s. One of the great historical questions is why then? Why between 1880 and 1920 were approximately 4,000 African Americans lynched in one way or another? Why by 1968 was that number almost 5,000? Why in the 1890s did the country average 139 lynchings per year? That's one every 2 or 3 days. Why did they take on a new savagery, a new sadism? And it was new. I mean, killing people is killing people. Well, there are many roots to this, not least of which was the psychosocial sexual idea that the races had to be kept separate or gene pools would be polluted. White people would themselves be infected with savagery, barbarism, and hence, if a black man touched, got near, threatened, spoke to, or could be accused of doing any of the above with a white woman, he was to be eliminated like a rabid dog. It has never been easy or simple to explain lynching, although we have book after book after book after book that does that. This is an 1889 lynching. Early one. I'm so sorry. Of a man named George Meadows. Murderer and rapist, it's announced, and they would put out these commemorative cards. This one happened near Birmingham, Alabama. Formally, it would be announced. Sometimes they would put the picture of his lynching on the back of the card. Lynching postcards became a very popular thing in the American South, and there's now a famous collection of them owned by a man named James Allen. I think he has sold it now to the UNC library. There's a magnificent, horrible, brutal book called Without Sanctuary, which is a book of some of the Jimmy Allen collection of these photographs and postcards, with introductions by John Lewis and the great late John Lewis and the great late Leon Litwack, a historian, trying to exhibit what lynchings really were. Now, the apartheid system takes hold in ideas first, habits first, and eventually, of course, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of laws that will separate even textbooks in storage. Not just the water fountains, not just the schools, not just the railway cars, but every element of life. Because somehow, for some Southerners, it was viewed as a reform, a way of containing and controlling the race problem. For others, it was physical protection, they thought. It will become the system that will give birth to the great modern civil rights movement, the results of which were magnificent if you can keep them. Now, I've run a little over here. Shoot. That's all right. I'll just end with this. The 1880s and 1890s was a dark period. There's all kinds of reform going on. There's all kinds of incredible artistic creativity going on. The blues were born. The women's suffrage movement never went away. They kept fighting and fighting and fighting. At the state level, they had some successes. A whole new generation of black artists and writers and sympathetic white artists and writers is going to come along. W.E.B. Du Bois wrote most of the essays that became the souls of black folk by 1897. The Conservation of the Races, his great essay about double consciousness and other things, he wrote that in 1897. Justice and injustice, they always affect each other. But I'm going to pass this on now. Hit it, Carl. I'm going to pass this on to my colleague, Bev Gage, with something a little less dark. Her first lecture is going to be on immigration. So, if you know it, sing along. Neil Diamond. They're coming to America. Get ready. Come on. Come on. Turn it up, Carl. Can you hear it up there? Yeah, all right. Come on. Come on.
Only one be free. We huddle close and hang on to a dream.
Whether you love or hate Neil Diamond, it doesn't matter.
On the boats and on the planes, they come into America.
Come on. Hey, the students are clapping a lot better than the first floor. Come on, come on, come on.
They come into America. Home,
He's just getting started.
don't it seem so far away? We're traveling light today. In the eye of the storm.
America.
In the eye of the storm. Home to a new and a
My
shining
grandparents,
place.
1896.
Make
Anyone
our
else?
bed and we'll say our grace.
Name a year.
Freedom's light burning warm. Freedom's light burning warm.
As loud as we can get it, huh?
Everywhere around the world, they come into America. Every time that flag's
Hey!
unfurled, they come into America. Got a dream to take them there. They come into America. Got a dream they come to share. They come